Hello everyone, this is Eg Arthur, or E.G. Arthur if you prefer, and with this video I'm going to try something a little different. I'm going to try to make a relatively short video as opposed to my usual tedious, verbose, long videos. And this is about GenOut version 1.03, the plugin GenOut, which includes a certain amount of content pertaining to the Farmers Fair Festival. But the video, other than some brief mentions in this intro, the video is only going to focus on the Farmers Fair content and not talk about at any length the code changes, the bug fixes, and so forth. So before I get started showing the footage of actually running the Farmers Fair, I do want to provide fair warning that I'm going to lead off by showing some circled chat bubbles on the screen. And this is not an attempt to show off my video editing skills, which are still pretty rudimentary, or to overwhelm the viewer. It's just to emphasize the reason why I came up with these use cases in the first place. Because if you don't use a plugin, you're pretty much obligated to either constantly scan the chat bubbles or to keep your eye constantly on the chat log, which can be rather tiring and laborious. So to demonstrate all of this, I'm going to use one of my brawlers. Brawlers, of course, were introduced after the Farmers Fair last year, so he has none of the titles or the deeds, and that's why I'm playing my brawlers a lot. And to begin, I've got 3 chat bubbles already circled here. One of them is a bounder complaining about being pelted with rotten fruit or vegetables. Another one is a saying of a hobbit that could have been indicative of their drunkenness, but actually wasn't. And another one is, the third circled chat bubble is a hobbit apologizing for being drunk. So move just a little bit down the road here, and now there's 3 more chat bubbles that I'm highlighting, one of which, or 2 of which, are sayings which, again, could have been drunk sayings, but turns out they were sober sayings. And the third one was just some random thing that a bounder is saying as he walks through Bywater. But every chat bubble contributes to the cognitive load if you're constantly having to scan them. Okay, there's another chat bubble, and another. One of those was potentially a drunk saying from a bounder, from a party goer, and the other one was the mayor saying something which means you might need to bring him some consumable for the Fat Mayor quest. Now, another thing I want to highlight here is the table for the Fat Mayor quest. When those items are present and visible, they're packed very close together, as you can see. And that raises an issue of misclicking. It's very easy to misclick the wrong thing, and that runs the risk that you would actually bring the mayor the wrong thing, and then that counts against you in the quest. So just make a mental note of that. I'm going to talk about that, but for now, I'm just going to show it to you, and I'll talk about it later. All right, and one last chat bubble that I'm going to highlight here is another party goer that could have said something drunk, but in actual fact, when you read through it, you discover that it was actually a sober thing to say. So one of the things you can do, instead of constantly looking at the chat bubbles and wearing yourself out doing that, is instead you could watch the chat log. And in this case, it's in the lower left-hand corner. One of the downsides of that is that in the default text and text color, if you happen to have a light background for your chat window, it can be kind of hard to read. So in order to address that problem, you might move to another part of the Bywater, and you might also drag out a separate tab for the chat. You might resize it. You can go even beyond that. You could go to the change chat colors and change the size and perhaps make it brighter. So this gives you a lot of visibility, and let's just wait to see something that comes up in the chat log that we have to act on. That's sober, that's sober. There we go. There's something drunk. Toes in your hair. Now, one of the downsides, though, of putting that chat window in the middle of your screen, as you can see, is I can't click through it. I would have to reposition it in order to click on the drunk hobbit that's underneath. Now, at this point, I just want to do a freeze frame and take a moment and talk about how this can evolve to be even better. And one of the things you may think of as an improvement here, as an evolution, is to load a plugin, one of the many plugins that can filter your chat so that you can deal with the problem of too much junk that you have to look through in order to find the things that you need to act on. And that's a perfectly good way to evolve this solution. Make the chat nice and visible, but then filter out the things that you don't care about. That's fine, but I'm going to skip over that step because I want to go to the next level of evolution, and that is to not only have a plugin focus on just the important stuff, but actually to put up a graphical cue on the screen so that you can instantly know that there's something you need to deal with. And in the case of boundar rounds, in addition to the graphical cue, put a very condensed version of what you need to look for among the chat bubbles. Just the bare minimum of what you're looking for in order to be able to tell a drunk hobbit from a sober hobbit. So I'm going to launch into that. We're already well into this video, and I haven't even shown you the plugin yet. Before I do that, though, I'm going to default my chat stuff so that it isn't too distracting. So let me default that. All right, now I'm going to bring up the setup utility for GenOut, and that is /GenOut space setup, assuming you've already got the plugin loaded and installed. Now, this is a pretty pristine config, although I forgot to resize that window. No alerts defined. Ready to go. So how do you load up new stuff into GenOut? You go to the imports directory. I'm going to drill down to mayor. As you can see, for the mayor use case, I have a directory structure which is aligned to each of the 3 languages because I've developed this use case for French, English, and German. But for now, I'm just going to demonstrate the English version. So drill down into the English directory, EN directory, and you see there's 2 files. That one of them says icon.txt, the other says table.txt. The icon version is what I'll start with, and this one just puts up an icon of the consumable that you need to bring to the mayor. And I'll switch over to the table one later. All right, so now that's one use case loaded up. Go back up into the hierarchy and to the boundar rounds directory. Now this one, I don't have separate subdirectories, and the reason for that is that each use case for each language only has a single file. So I thought it was overkill to have directories with just a single file on them. That's just, I don't like directories that just have single files. So it should be fairly obvious from the file names what languages they are. Festgast is German, Ivre is French, of course, and then Partygoer is English. So let me open up the English one, select all the text. Usually in most text editors, a Control-A will do that for you. Copy, go back to the game, to the import tab, paste, save, and now we have our second alert to find. All right, so now it's just a matter of waiting for a graphic to come up. And waiting. And waiting. Notice that I don't even have my regular chat log up at this point. Okay, the mayor wants some wine. I have my combat log up, which doesn't really have anything interesting. So the mayor wants wine. I already knew that from the graphic. And there's a drunk hobbit somewhere that said bad Maggins rather than mad Baggins. But I'm just going to ignore that for now, because what I want to show you instead, I'm going to ignore that drunk hobbit, and I'm going to go into reposition UI, because what I want to do is deal with the problem of all those items stacked on the table too closely together. Now, when I clicked on the bucket of wine, you may have noticed a little nameplate came up in the upper left-hand corner near my character portrait that said bucket of wine. Well, in order to verify that I have clicked on the correct thing, I would prefer that that nameplate comes up near the middle of my screen. So I'm going to use reposition UI to move that nameplate to the middle of my screen. The name of the widget is, strangely enough, Opponent Vitals. The trouble is, there's a little catch to this. You see, there is no widget called Opponent Vitals in the position where that nameplate occurred. It's actually kind of weird the way this works. The widget doesn't show up unless you actually have something selected. This is a restriction that I don't think applies to any other widget that's within reposition UI. I mean, you look at mount stuff, don't need to be mounted. Look at escort stuff, don't need to be escorting. Fellowship maneuvers, and so on and so forth. None of those require that the things be active. But for the Opponent Vitals widget, you do need to have something selected. And you see now I select one of the hobbits and the Opponent Vital widget shows up, and now I can move that widget to the center of my screen. All right, so now let's wait for the next graphic to show up. Mayor's about to say something, and no graphic comes up. The reason for that is that this particular alert ignores things that the mayor says that do not require you to bring a consumable to him. If you bring a consumable to him, of course, when he doesn't want one, then that counts against you. Too many of those and you fail the quest, right? In the meantime, somebody said slupper, and I scolded them. Somebody is saying fresh licked vegetables, and I scolded them. Again, I don't need to be looking at the chat bubbles constantly. I don't need to be looking at the chat log. I can just wait for that graphic to come up and let me know whether there's something for me to do or not. All right, so I need water. I need to scold somebody who said squirrel. Now, once you have that nameplate there, by the way, if you want to, you could click on the nameplate itself, and then you get a little sub-menu, and one of the options is Use. Waiting for a graphic to come up. See, there's chat bubbles coming up, but they don't indicate a drunk hobbit or that the mayor needs something. So you can just safely ignore those. And there again, the mayor said something that doesn't require any kind of action, so the alert just ignores that until something comes along that you need to deal with. Somebody said squirrel. I'm almost done with bounder rounds. I need one more for bounder rounds. Waiting for the graphic. Another thing I'll mention is that sometimes the alert will see, because it's looking at the chat log, it will sometimes see things that you wouldn't be able to see if you were just scanning the chat bubbles. Because whoever said it is too far away. The only way you'd be able to catch that is if you're watching the chat log yourself or you're getting a plugin to do it for you. Right, so I'm done with bounder rounds, and I'm halfway through the Fat Mayor. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into my setup utility and do some maintenance here. I'm going to disable the bounder rounds, and unfortunately you have to save it in order for that to take. And I'm going to delete the Fat Mayor alert because I will go in and replace the icon version with the table version. So get the contents of the file, copy, paste, save. Now I have the table version of that. And we'll see that in a moment. Now, I'm going to kind of cheat a little bit. I happen to see that chat bubble, and I just can't stand to wait. I am trying to make this video short, after all, so I'm just going to go and grab that, even though the alert didn't see it because it wasn't loaded yet. So I cheated. One thing I'll point out about the bounder rounds alert, sometimes it will ignore drunk hobbits. And the reason for that is I have put a 5-second cooldown into that alert. You can see that in the response tab of the alert. And the reason for that is to, the mayor said something again that doesn't require any action, so I'll continue talking about the cooldown. The thing I'm trying to prevent is what we in the IT world call thrashing, which is changing things without doing any productive work. Like in this case, you could get one graphic come up with one set of text, and then some other drunk hobbit speaks. You get that graphic overlaid with some other text. You might go and try to find that text, and then you get another drunk hobbit. And so that's what's called thrashing. And I find it very annoying. So I put in a 5-second cooldown. You could tweak that if you want to a different value, or you could eliminate it altogether. All right, so now finally, the mayor says something that requires action. With the table version of the Fat Mayor alert, you see what I have there with the freeze frame and the zoom. You can see there's an image of the table. The particular consumable that the mayor wants is circled. In this case, it's the pile of salt. And then there's a big a big, ugly, frankly, arrow with the words "Too Fat Mayor" pointing towards the mayor's position relative to the table image. Now, the reason that I put that arrow there is that while you can change the position of the image and you can change the size and shape of it, you could stretch it out horizontally or vertically. What you can't do currently is you can't rotate it. You can't change its orientation. So although you can change it relative to your character, you can't change it relative to where the mayor is. It will always be in that same orientation. So the arrow helps guide you to where the mayor is relative to the table. Maybe in the future, I'll provide a rotate option, but for now, I'm using the arrow just so it doesn't get too confusing. See, I always find the salt to be the hardest one to click on, but if you click on the nameplate there and say use, then you don't have much of a risk of misclicking, right-clicking on the wrong thing and giving the mayor the wrong thing. And now we're just waiting for the final utterance from the mayor to see if he needs a consumable. here I am demonstrating how you can move that around. So while I'm waiting for those quests to be finished out, I want to indulge in a little bit more lobbying or rationalization for why people would use these plugin use cases in the first place. I happen to think that even if you're very familiar with the quest and you're reading this in your native language and you have good reading comprehension and if you're a quick reader, it's still more casual and more relaxing to just wait for that graphic to come up before you have to get hyped up and go off and do whatever it is that the graphic is indicating that you do. However, if any one of those things isn't true, if you are a slow reader or have bad reading comprehension, or perhaps you have a reading disability, maybe you're recovering from a stroke, or for whatever reason, if you find reading and comprehending difficult, this I think would help you. Also, in the scenario where you're not a native speaker of whatever language of the client you're using, in other words, English, French, or German. For instance, I would think that a lot of Dutch people probably run the German client because Dutch and German have some similarities to each other, I understand. And maybe your comprehension of German is better than your comprehension of English, but still, reading through all those chat bubbles that are not in your native language can be challenging. It can be tiring. Isn't it better that a plugin identifies the drunk hobbits, or it shows you what ingredient to fetch for the mayor? I think that's a plus. If you attempt to do that yourself and you're not a native speaker, you can run into certain subtleties and nuances and ambiguities. I'll give you one example. I'm not a native speaker of German. I do know some German. But when I was busy developing these use cases in the German client, I had a lot of trouble with the difference in one of the sayings, Hobbit sayings, between Kartoffeln vom Ohm versus Kartoffeln des Ohms. Now, without getting into a big linguistic discussion, both of those seem to translate into Ohm's potatoes, where Ohm is gaffer. So gaffer's potatoes. Sometimes if you consult a German to English dictionary, you'll see that they say from Ohm rather than Ohm's, possessive. But in any case, one is dative using dative, the dative case using von, and the other one is genitive. And as far as I can tell, even native speakers of German differ on which to use under certain circumstances. I've heard it said that one is more formal than the other, or more old-fashioned. I've also heard it said that Austrians don't tend to use the genitive. So if anybody is a native speaker and wants to correct me on this, but the basic point I'm trying to make here is that for a non-native speaker, this distinction is going to be very difficult to grasp. Of course, if you do the quest a number of times, eventually you just learn through trial and error which is correct and which is incorrect, which is to say, which is a drunk hobbit and which is a sober hobbit. But at that point, you're just pattern matching. You're not actually comprehending. And when it comes to pattern matching, computers are pretty good at that. The part of GenOut that does this matching is literally called patterns. So this is a pattern matching function. So why not let the computer do the pattern matching and give your poor brain a rest? So that's just one example of where the plugin could come in useful for non-native speakers. So while I've been babbling on about languages that I don't even speak fluently. As you can see, I've wrapped up all of those quests, turned in all of those quests. And now I'll just wrap up the video. To recap, version 1.03 has Farmer's Faire content in it for the Bounder rounds and the Fat Mare quest. I do think that it is something that can help people. It can make their festival questing more convenient. I want to emphasize that all of these things that I'm showing are configurable. You can tweak many different aspects. The name of the plugin, after all, is GenOut, which is short for Generic Outputter. It is generic and can be customized. And I hope that I can produce more videos and produce more code and add more features to GenOut as things go on, plus fix any bugs and so forth. And hopefully you enjoyed watching the video and you can get these things up and running and it can help you with the Farmer's Faire. So I'll talk to you and interact with you later. Bye-bye.